Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku fought alone for 24 hours. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain did not cleanse the city. It merely slicked the grime, turning the dust of ruined buildings and the soot of fires into a gray, oily sludge that coated the streets. It was a cold rain, unseasonal and biting, the kind that seeped through reinforced Kevlar and settled deep in the marrow of broken bones. Midoriya Izuku sat on the edge of a gargoyle perched atop a cathedral in the 4th ward, his breathing shallow and ragged. The sound of his own respiration was loud inside the cowl of his mask, a wet, rattling intake, followed by a shuddering exhale. In. Out. In. Out. He had to manually remind his body to do it. If he stopped focusing, he felt as though his heart might simply forget to beat, too exhausted to keep up the rhythm on its own. Below him, the Hercules, All Might's armored car, sat idling in an alleyway, a dark beetle hiding from the storm. Izuku looked at his hands. The gauntlets, once pristine support items from the US, were scuffed and cracked. The dark green fabric of his suit was torn in 3 places on the left thigh, stitched together hastily with black thread that was already fraying. He clenched his fist. The tremors were getting worse. Not the tremors of fear. He had forgotten what fear felt like weeks ago, replaced entirely by a hollow, driving urgency. But the tremors of a machine running on fumes. Midoriya, my boy, the voice crackled through the comms in his earpiece. It was tinny, distorted by the storm and the interference of the crumbling city infrastructure, but the worry in it was crystal clear. The sensors are picking up a drop in your body temperature. You've been out there for 6 hours straight since the last patrol. Please, come back to the car. Just for 10 minutes. I have a pork cutlet bowl. It's still warm. Izuku stared at the rain falling past his boots. A pork cutlet bowl. Katsudon. The thought of it made his stomach cramp violently. He hadn't eaten a full meal in 2 days, surviving on energy jelly pouches and adrenaline. His body screamed for the calories, but his mind rejected the idea of stopping. Stopping meant Shigaraki got further away. Stopping meant All for One had time to plan. Stopping meant someone else got hurt because he wasn't there. I'm okay, All Might, Izuku whispered. His voice was a raspy ghost of what it used to be. I'm checking the coordinates Hawk sent. The sighting near the industrial sector. If it's a high-end, I can't let it establish a nest. The top 3 are on their way to that sector. All Might pleaded. Endeavor is 10 minutes out. You don't have to do this alone. Wait for backup. Izuku, please. Izuku stood up. The movement caused a sharp lance of pain to shoot up his lower back, a reminder of the villain with the sledgehammer quirk from yesterday. He ignored it. Pain was just information. It was just data telling him which muscles to favor. They're too slow, Izuku said. Not out of arrogance, but out of a cold, mathematical certainty. If I wait 10 minutes, the target moves. If the target moves, the trail goes cold. I'm going in. Izuku! He cut the connection, tapping the side of his cowl. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the drumming of the rain. He felt a pang of guilt, a sharp, twisting knife in his gut that had nothing to do with hunger. He hated treating All Might like this. He hated the look in Yagi Tashinori's skeletal eyes every time Izuku returned to the car covered in new blood. But he had to be the monster now. He had to be the boogeyman that scared the villains back into the shadows. A hero who needed rest was a hero who let people die. Black Whip exploded from his shoulders, 6 tendrils of dark energy lashing out into the night. They gripped the corners of the adjacent high-rise. With a flex of his knees and a burst of green lightning, full cowling at 45%. Izuku launched himself into the void. The industrial sector, known colloquially as the ward, was a graveyard of the pre-quirk era. It was a grid of massive, rusting factories, warehouses the size of city blocks, and smokestacks that clawed at the sky like dead fingers. Since the collapse of prison society, and the escape of the Tartarus convicts, the ward had become a no-man's land. Civilians had fled weeks ago. The power grid had been cut. It was a black hole on the map of Japan. Izuku moved through the air with a terrifying lack of grace. He wasn't flying. He was hurling himself violently against gravity. float kept him buoyant, black whip pulled him forward, and FA gene built up kinetic energy for sudden, jerking changes in direction. He was a blur of green and black, a projectile skipping across the rooftops. Inside the void of One for All, the vestiges were restless. "You're favoring your left leg," the fifth user, Daigoro Banjo, grunted. His voice resonated in the back of Izuku's skull. "Your landings are sloppy. If you take a heavy hit on that side, you're going down." "He knows, Banjo," the first user's gentle voice interjected. "He is compensating. He is deteriorating," came the sharp, militaristic tone of the second user. "The boy is running at 110% capacity on an engine built for 80%. At this rate, efficiency will drop to critical levels within the hour." "Quiet," Izuku muttered to the empty air, swinging around a rusting water tower. "I need to focus. Danger sense is odd tonight," the fourth user, Haikichi Shinomori, whispered. That caught Izuku's attention. He landed on the corrugated metal roof of a shipping warehouse, skidding to a halt. The metal groaned under his reinforced iron saws. He crouched, scanning the darkness. "Odd how?" Izuku thought, projecting the question inward. "It's usually a sharp stab," Haikichi explained, the sensation manifesting as a phantom pressure on Izuku's temples. "Directional. Immediate. But since we entered the ward, it's been humming, like a low-voltage current all over your head. It's not warning you of an attack. It's warning you of the environment itself." Izuku narrowed his eyes. The rain was falling harder now, a torrential sheet that reduced visibility to near zero. He activated the thermal vision in his cowl, but the lenses were damaged, flickering with static. All he saw were ghosts of heat rising from the cooling pavement. The intel from Hawks had been specific. Multiple reports of a Nomo-type creature dragging bodies into the Fukui Heavy Industries plant. Possible stockpiling for All for One. It fit the pattern. AFO needed resources. He needed bodies for the doctor's research, or whatever was left of it. Izuku stood up, the water streaming off his tattered cape. He looked like a wraith, the yellow cape grimed to a muddy brown, the bunny ear mask torn and drooping, the glowing green eyes the only sign of life in a shell of exhaustion. He leaped from the warehouse, aiming for the central factory. As he fell through the air, he reached for his pocket. His fingers brushed the cold, crushed plastic of the bento box All Might had shoved into his utility belt earlier. He hadn't eaten it. He couldn't. Eating felt like admitting he was human, and humans were weak. But just touching it, knowing it was there, gave him a microscopic spark of warmth. "I'll eat it when I clear the sector," he promised himself. "Just one more patrol. Then I'll eat." He landed in the courtyard of the Fukui plant. It was silent, not the silence of an empty place, but the silence of a held breath. The wind didn't howl here. The rain seemed to hit the ground with less noise. "Hello?" Izuku said. The word was swallowed instantly by the dark. Buzz, danger sense twitched. Not a spike, but a rise in the ambient pressure. Izuku spun around, black whip flaring out instinctively. Nothing. Just rusting shipping containers and wet concrete. Buzz, louder this time. "Fourth?" Izuku asked mentally. I can't pinpoint it." Haikichi's voice was strained, laced with panic. "It's everywhere, ninth. It's not coming from a person. It's the air. The ground." Izuku reached up to his ear to tap his comms again. He needed to tell Endeavor the location was active. Something was wrong. "All Might, I'm at the site. It feels static, not just white noise, but a screeching, high-pitched feedback loop that made Izuku wince and tear the earpiece out. He stared at the small device in his hand. The light on it was dead. He looked at his GPS gauntlet on his left wrist. The screen was black. "An EMP?" he muttered. "No, my suit systems are still running. Just the communications." Crack. The sound was like a thunderclap, but it didn't come from the sky. It came from the perimeter of the ward. Izuku looked up. 4 miles away, to the north, a pillar of purple light shot into the sky. A split second later, another pillar erupted to the south. Then east. Then west. They were massive, towering beams of energy that pierced the storm clouds. "What is that?" Izuku breathed. The pillars flared, and then, with a sound like tearing metal, sheets of translucent, violet energy connected them. It happened in a heartbeat. A dome, a massive, shimmering dome of hard light energy was closing over the entire industrial district. No, Izuku gasped. He kicked off the ground, activating One for All, full cowling 100% for a fraction of a second. The concrete beneath him disintegrated into dust as he launched himself toward the sky, aiming for the gap at the top of the closing dome. He was fast. Faster than a bullet train. Faster than sound. But the trap was faster. The dome sealed shut with a deafening THOM just as Izuku reached the apex of his jump. He didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He wound back his right arm, channeling the stockpile of power, the strength of 8 generations. Smash! He punched the barrier. It should have shattered. He had punched through mountains of muscle, through tornadoes, through steel walls. But the barrier didn't shatter. The force of his impact was absorbed instantly, the violet energy rippling like water. And then, the laws of physics seemed to invert. The force he had poured into the barrier was reflected perfectly, magnified and redirected. Boom! Izuku was blasted backward as if he had been swatted by a giant hand. He plummeted from the sky, crashing through the roof of a 3-story office building, smashing through floor after floor of concrete and rebar until he hit the basement foundation. Dust and debris rained down on him. He lay there for a moment, stunned. The air had been knocked out of his lungs. His right arm, the one he had punched with, was throbbing with a dull, red-hot agony. Not broken, thanks to the shock absorption of the gauntlet and his own durability, but bruised to the bone. Get up! The second user barked. Move, ninth! That wasn't a defensive wall. That was a cage, Izuku coughed, rolling onto his side. He scrambled to his feet, swaying. The world was spinning. He looked up through the hole he had made in the building. Through the rain and the layers of broken floors he could see the sky. It wasn't black anymore. It was purple. The barrier covered everything. The rain was still falling inside, trapped with him, but the outside world was gone. No city lights. No stars. Just the humming, violet wall. He tapped his palms again, desperate. All might? Endeavor? Can anyone hear me? Silence. He tried to activate the emergency beacon in his belt. Dead. He was cut off. And then, the noise started. It began as a low rumble, vibrating the floor beneath his boots. Then, floodlights, dozens of them, mounted on the surrounding factory roofs, slammed on simultaneously. Blinding white light flooded the district, turning the night into a harsh, washed-out stage. The glare was intense, designed to disorient. Izuku shielded his eyes, his pupils constricting painfully. A screech of feedback echoed through the district, bouncing off the hard light barrier. It sounded like a microphone being dragged across a chalkboard, amplified 1,000 times. Then a voice. It wasn't coming from a person. It was coming from the public address system of the industrial park, a network of speakers wired to every pole and building. Testing. Testing. 1, 2. The voice was smooth, cultured, and terrifyingly familiar. Izuku froze. The blood in his veins turned to ice. All for one, he whispered. Ah. There you are, the voice crooned, echoing from every direction at once. It sounded amused. I apologize for the crude accommodations, Midoriya Izuku. I prefer a more intimate setting for our chats, but given your propensity for running away lately, I felt a playpen was necessary. Izuku scrambled out of the basement, leaping up through the hole to the roof of the office building. He needed the high ground. He needed to see. The floodlights illuminated the entire ward. He could see the barrier clearly now. It encompassed a radius of perhaps 10 city blocks. A gladiator arena. You are wondering about your friends, All for One's voice continued. The former number 1 is likely pounding on the outside of this barrier right now. It is a lovely quirk, isn't it? Spatial lock, stolen from a rather reclusive hero in the Swiss Alps years ago. Nothing gets in. Nothing gets out. Signal waves, radio frequencies, sound. You are in a jar, little ghost. Izuku scanned the perimeter. Where are you? He shouted, though he knew the villain wasn't physically there. Show yourself. I am everywhere, and nowhere, the voice chuckled. But I am not the one you should be worried about. A massive digital clock on the side of the Fukui Heavy Industries Tower, once used to track shift changes, flickered to life. The red LEDs blazed through the rain. Midnight. It began to count down. 23 hours 59 minutes and 58 seconds. The barrier is fueled by a massive, finite energy source. All for one explained, his tone sounding like a professor giving a lecture. It will hold for exactly 24 hours. If you survive until then, the walls come down. You can go back to your warm car and your pork cutlet bowl. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew about the bowl. He had been watching, but the voice darkened, dropping an octave. I am afraid I have populated your cage with some friends who are very eager to meet you. They have been starving, you see, and I promised them that if they bring me your head, I will let them out. Buzz. The danger sense exploded. It wasn't a hum anymore. It was a scream. It felt like a hot nail being driven into Izuku's prefrontal cortex. He clutched his head, staggering back. Ninth! Create distance! Haikid shouted. From the shadows of the warehouses, from the sewers, from the rusted shipping containers, they emerged. First, it was just movement in the periphery. A shuffle of feet. The scrape of metal on concrete. Then, they stepped into the harsh glare of the floodlights. Villains. Dozens of them. No, hundreds. Izuku stared, his eyes widening. He recognized faces from the police files he had been memorizing. There was Muscular, his new prosthetic eye gleaming red, his fibers already bursting from his skin. There was Moonfish, his teeth clattering together, straitjacket trailing behind him. There were convicts from the Tartarus lower levels, murderers, cannibals, warlords. And behind them, towering over the infantry, were the silhouettes of three darker, lankier shapes. High-end Nomus. Not the talkative ones, but the beasts. The hunters. They formed a circle around the office building where Izuku stood. A sea of malice. Scientific inquiry, all for one mused over the speakers. Let us see how long the candle burns without oxygen. Let us see if the successor is worthy. Izuku looked at the clock. 23 hours 59 minutes and 10 seconds. He looked at the army below him. He was tired. His bones ached. His eyes burned. He was alone, trapped in a bubble with the worst monsters humanity had ever produced, cut off from the light of the world. He remembered Nightai's prediction. He remembered Sir's cold, dying hand. A gruesome death. Is this it? Izuku whispered. Is this where it happens? No. Nana Shimura's voice was fierce, cutting through his doubt. Not today! Stand up, kid! Banjo roared. Focus! The second commanded. Izuku took a breath. He forced the air deep into his lungs, ignoring the smell of rot and ozone. He reached down and tightened the straps of his gauntlets. He wiped the rain from his mask. The fear was there, yes. It was a cold, heavy stone in his gut. But beneath the fear, beneath the exhaustion, the embers of One for All began to glow. They responded to his will. Green lightning crackled around his body, illuminating the rooftop. It arced wildly, tearing up the gravel. The energy output spiked. 30%. 40%. 45%. He stepped to the edge of the roof. Below him, Muscular roared, looking up with a grin of pure, sadistic joy. DKU. Izuku didn't flinch. He looked down at the horde, his eyes glowing with an ethereal, spectral fire. He didn't say a heroic catchphrase. He didn't smile like All Might. He just raised his fists. Come and get me, he said, and then, he jumped into the horde. The timer ticked down. 23 hours and 58 minutes. The longest night of Midoriya Izuku's life had begun. The air left his lungs the moment he hit the ground. Midoriya Izuku did not land like a superhero. There was no three-point crouch, no dramatic pause for effect. He landed like a meteor striking a mountainside. He crashed into the center of the asphalt courtyard, the impact shattering the wet pavement, and sending a shockwave of water and debris outward in a radio blast. For a microsecond, the horde of villains flinched. The sheer kinetic force of his arrival created a vacuum, a momentary bubble of silence in the storm. Then, the bubble popped. Kill him! The scream came from a convict on the left, a man with blades erupting from his forearms. It was the spark that ignited the powder keg. The circle collapsed inward. Izuku didn't think. Thinking took time, and time was the one resource All for One had stripped away. He let danger sense dictate his reality. The quirk, usually a sharp stab of warning, was currently a deafening roar in the back of his skull, a white noise of hostility that blanketed 360 degrees. He ducked. A concrete pillar, thrown by a villain with a gigantification quirk, whistled through the space where his head had been a fraction of a second prior. Izuku pivoted on his heel, the iron sole of his boot grinding against the asphalt. "Don't engage the big ones yet!" The fifth user, Lariat, shouted in his mind. "Mobility, kid! Stay off the ground!" "Right," Izuku gritted out. He channeled One for All to 30%. Green lightning arced violently around his body, illuminating the rain droplets like suspended emeralds. Black Whip. 6 tendrils of dark energy exploded from his back. They didn't aim for the villains, they aimed for the environment. 2 latched onto a rusted crane overhead, 2 snagged the corner of the Fukui factory, and 2 whipped low, sweeping the legs of the nearest attackers. With a flex of his shoulders, Izuku launched himself upward, yanking himself out of the crushing mass of bodies just as a dozen quirks detonated in the spot he had been standing. Fire, acid, and jagged spikes collided in a chaotic mess of friendly fire. "He's fast!" Someone screamed. "Don't let him get to the roofs! Shoot him down!" The air filled with projectiles. Bullets, energy blasts, and solidified shards of bone. Izuku twisted in midair, a maneuver he had practiced 1,000 times. He released the crane and fired a shot of air pressure, Delaware smash, Air Force, from his fingers. The blast didn't hit a person, it hit the water tower above the villains. The rusted supports buckled, and thousands of gallons of water cascaded down, knocking the shooters off balance. He landed on the second-story catwalk of the factory, his chest heaving. Hour 1, the warm-up. The first hour wasn't a fight. It was a physics problem. Izuku moved through the industrial complex like a pinball. He couldn't stay still for more than 3 seconds. If he paused, they swarmed. These weren't the League of Villains. These weren't the calculated, ideologically driven threats he was used to. These were the dregs of Tartarus, and the escaped convicts from 7 different maximum security prisons. They were desperate, hungry, and terrified of All for One. They fought with the reckless abandon of animals cornered in a burning forest. Izuku vaulted over a ventilating duct as a villain with a sludge quirk lunged at him. "Left!" the fourth user warned. Izuku sidestepped, grabbing the sludge villain by the collar. Instead of punching him, Izuku used the villain's own momentum, spinning him around and throwing him into a second attacker who was charging with an electrified spear. Zap! The 2 villains convulsed and dropped. 2 down, Izuku whispered. He checked his internal map. 400 to go. Don't count. The second user's voice was cold, sharp as a razor. Counting implies a finite end. Assume the number is infinite. Focus on efficiency. You wasted movement on that throw. Your elbow was too wide. I'm trying not to break their necks. Izuku snapped back internally, leaping to a higher gantry. If you don't incapacitate them permanently, they will get back up. The second retorted. Look, Izuku glanced down. The sludge villain was already stirring, shaking his head. The electric villain was groaning, reaching for his spear. Izuku cursed under his breath. He was holding back. Even now, looking like a demon in his tattered suit, surrounded by murderers, the instinct to save, or at least, to not destroy, was woven into his DNA. He was pulling his punches. He was binding them with Black Whip instead of shattering their bones, and it was costing him stamina. Boom! The wall of the factory next to him exploded inward. Izuku was thrown sideways, tumbling across the metal grating. He caught himself with Black Whip, skidding to a halt. Through the dust and rain, a massive figure stepped onto the catwalk. The metal groaned under the weight. Muscles piled upon muscles, fibers weaving together like exposed meat cables. The prosthetic eye glowed a sinister red. I knew it, the giant rumbled. I knew you were holding back, Deku. Muscular. Or rather, the man who used to be muscular. Now, he was just a ball of rage named Goto Masuji. Izuku stood up slowly, wiping blood from his lip. I don't have time for you, Masuji. That's the fun part. Muscular grinned, the fibers on his arms expanding until they were the size of tree trunks. We have all night. And this time, no water boy to save you. No Eraserhead to look at me. Just you, me, and the pain. He lunged. The speed was terrifying for a man of his size. He closed the 20-meter gap in a heartbeat. Izuku didn't block. He couldn't. Blocking a hit from Muscular was like trying to catch a falling building. Instead, he activated FA Gene. He had been building up the kinetic energy during his frantic parkour around the district. Every landing, every squat, every turn had been stored. Pseudo 100%. The world slowed down. Izuku saw the fibers of Muscular's fist approaching his face. He saw the rain droplets suspended in the air. He ducked under the punch, moving so fast he was a blur to the naked eye. As he passed under Muscular's guard, he didn't punch the villain. His fist was too small, and Muscular's armor of flesh was too thick. Instead, Izuku unleashed 5 tendrils of Black Whip. He wrapped them around Muscular's ankles and, using the villain's own forward momentum combined with the explosive power of FA Gene, he heaved. What? Muscular was launched off the catwalk. Izuku didn't watch him fall. He knew it wouldn't kill him. He knew Muscular would climb back up in 5 minutes. But 5 minutes was an eternity. Moving! Izuku gasped, sprinting away from the breach. He didn't get far. As he exited the factory onto a rooftop garden, 3 villains were waiting. They weren't brawlers. They were shooters. One had fingers that looked like rifle barrels. One had a chest that glowed with plasma. The third was floating, surrounded by telekinetic knives. Fire! Izuku dived behind an HVAC unit as the air filled with noise. The metal unit was shredded in seconds. Smoke screen! The 6th user, N, commanded. On it! Izuku opened the vents on his gauntlets. Purple smoke bellowed out, thick and heavy. It mixed with the rain, creating a dense, suffocating fog that rolled across the rooftop. The shooting stopped. Where is he? I can't see anything. Inside the smoke, Izuku was a phantom. He closed his eyes. He didn't need to see. Danger sense told him where their hostility was coming from. He moved silently. Snap! He appeared behind the rifle finger villain, chopping the man strictly on the carotid artery. The villain crumpled without a sound. Whoosh! He slid under the floating villain, shooting a Black Whip upward to snag the man's ankle and yank him down into a knee strike. The plasma villain panicked, firing blindly into the smoke. Stay back! Stay back! Izuku emerged from the purple haze directly in front of him. The villain's eyes went wide. All he saw were the glowing green eyes of the mask. Sleep, Izuku whispered. A controlled 5% tap to the chin. The villain's lights went out. Izuku stood over them, breathing hard. The rain was washing the smoke away quickly. Good, the 2nd user admitted. Better. But look at your hands. Izuku looked. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the constant, micro-adjustments of One for All. You're burning calories too fast. The 2nd continued. You're sprinting a marathon. You need to lower the output. Stop using FA Gene for movement. Use the environment. They're everywhere, Izuku panted, looking over the edge of the roof. Below, the courtyard was filling up again. The ones he had knocked down were getting up. More were pouring in from the surrounding streets. They were like ants. Hour 2, the grind. The rain intensified. It was a deluge now, hammering the district with enough force to bruise. Izuku had moved to the eastern sector of the ward, an area dominated by shipping containers stacked 5 high. It was a maze. A labyrinth of rusted steel. He hoped it would bottleneck them. He was wrong. The villains just climbed. They crawled over the containers like spiders. Izuku was running along the tops of the containers, jumping gaps. He was being chased by a pack of heteromorphs, villains with animal traits. A shark man, a cheetah woman, and something that looked like a gargoyle. They were fast. Why are you running, hero? The cheetah woman shrieked, leaping a gap that Izuku had barely cleared. AFO said you were the strongest. Why do you run like a rabbit? Strategic positioning, Izuku muttered to himself. He skidded to a stop at the edge of the container stacks. A dead end. Below him was a drop into a flooded alleyway. The 3 villains landed behind him, blocking his retreat. End of the line, the shark man grinned, revealing rows of serrated teeth. Izuku turned to face them. He stood tall, despite the fatigue gnawing at his legs. You don't have to do this, Izuku said, his voice projecting over the rain. All for One is using you. He doesn't care if you live or die. He just wants to tire me out. You're fodder to him, the gargoyle laughed. It was a grating sound, like stone grinding on stone. Maybe. But if we kill you, we get freedom. Real freedom. Money. Power. A place in the new world. There is no new world with him, Izuku said sadly. Just a void. Shut up and die. The shark man charged. Izuku sighed. He dropped into a low stance. Black Whip formed a brace around his right arm. As the shark man lunged, Izuku didn't strike him. He struck the container roof itself. Detroit smash. 20%. The metal roof buckled violently. The structural integrity of the container stack failed. The entire stack tilted, then collapsed sideways. The villains screamed as the floor fell out from under them. Izuku leaped at the last second, catching the edge of the adjacent stack with Black Whip and swinging to safety. He watched the container stack crash into the alleyway below with a thunderous clang. The villains were buried under debris. They were alive. He had felt their presence with danger sense. But they were trapped. Resourceful. Nana Shimura noted warmly. But that was risky, Izuku. You could have brought the whole row down on yourself. I had to separate them, Izuku thought back. If I fight them in a group, I take hits. I can't take hits. He sat down on the wet metal for a second, clutching his left shoulder. A stray bullet from earlier had grazed him. It wasn't deep, but the salt from his sweat and the dirty rain made it sting like fire. He checked his pocket. The bento box was now a compressed lump of plastic and rice. Not yet, he whispered. He needed to check the perimeter. He needed to find the source of the jamming signal. If he could disable the jammer, he could call for help. He stood up. And then he froze. Down in the alleyway, amidst the wreckage of the containers, he saw something. A small figure. Huddled under a piece of corrugated metal. A child? Izuku's heart stopped. No, he gasped. He said the zone was clear. He squinted through the thermal vision. The signature was faint, barely warmer than the rain. Small. Curled up. It's a trap, Ninth. The second user warned immediately. Don't, I have to check, Izuku said. What if a civilian was left behind? What if they were hiding? Danger sense is flaring. Haikage warned. It's been flaring for 2 hours. Izuku argued. I can't ignore it. He jumped down. He landed in the flooded alley, water splashing up to his knees. He moved toward the huddled figure. Hey! Izuku called out, softening his voice. It's okay. I'm a hero. I'm here to help. The figure didn't move. Izuku got closer. He reached out a hand. Are you hurt? He touched the figure's shoulder. The figure turned around. It wasn't a child. It was a mannequin. A store dummy, dressed in a child's raincoat, and strapped to its chest was a bundle of dynamite and a proximity sensor. Beep. Move! All the vestiges screamed in unison. Izuku threw himself backward, wrapping himself in Black Whip like a cocoon. Boom! The explosion was contained by the narrow alley, which made it worse. The concussion wave hit Izuku like a sledgehammer. He was blasted out of the water, slamming into the brick wall of the warehouse opposite the alley. He slid down the wall, hitting the water face first. His ears were ringing. A high-pitched whine that drowned out the rain. He pushed himself up, coughing water. His vision was blurry. His mask was cracked on the right side, exposing his eye. Hey, doll! He wheezed. Laughter echoed from the rooftops above. Did you see him jump? A voice cackled. AFO said he was a bleeding heart. Said he'd bite on anything that looked like a victim. Izuku looked up. Standing on the roof were 5 villains. One of them, a man with a tech-based visor, was holding a remote. Got him right in the sweet spot, the man sneered. Look at him. The dark hero. Pathetic. Something snapped inside Izuku. It wasn't the bone in his rib, though that was definitely cracked. It was something in his philosophy. He had been treating this like a rescue mission. He had been treating them like victims of AFO, but they weren't victims right now. They were hunters. And they had just used his kindness, his very essence, as a weapon against him. Izuku stood up. The water dripped off his suit. The green lightning returned, but this time, it was jagged, unstable. The second user didn't say anything. He just pushed a sensation of approval into Izuku's mind. You think that was funny? Izuku asked. His voice was low, terrifyingly calm. The villains on the roof stopped laughing. He's still standing? Izuku crouched. One for all, full cowling 45%. He didn't use Black Whip to swing. He jumped. Straight up. He cleared the 3 stories in a single bound, landing in the middle of the group. The impact cracked the roof. Wah! The tech villain started. Izuku didn't give him time. He didn't use a complicated move. He didn't analyze their quirks. He grabbed the tech villain by the throat and slammed him into the roof. The concrete shattered. The villain went limp instantly. The other 4 backed away, terrified. Monster! One screamed, firing a laser from his eyes. Izuku tilted his head. The laser grazed his ear. He moved. A hook punch to the gut of the laser villain. The man folded. A sweep of the legs to the 3rd. A Black Whip capture of the 4th, swinging him into the 5th. It took 6 seconds. 5 villains lay unconscious on the roof. Izuku stood in the center of them, his chest heaving. The rain washed the dust off his suit. Good, the second user said. Now you're fighting. Stop saving them. Just survive them. Izuku looked at his hands. He hadn't killed them. But he had hit them harder than he ever had before. He had heard ribs crack. Izuku started, his voice trembling. You have 21 hours left. The first user reminded him gently. Save the regret for tomorrow. Right now you need to move. The explosion attracted more of them. Izuku nodded. He shoved the guilt down into the box where he kept his fear and his hunger. He turned and ran. Hour 3, the attrition. The numbers weren't going down. That was the horror of it. Izuku had taken out maybe 50 villains in the first 2 hours. But every time he dropped one, the shadow seemed to vomit up 2 more. AFO had emptied the prisons. The ward was crawling with them. Izuku was currently holed up in the loading bay of a pharmaceutical distribution center. It was hour 3. He was sitting behind a forklift, trying to fix the seal on his mask with a strip of duct tape he had found in a supply closet. His body was starting to complain. The adrenaline from the initial drop was wearing off, replaced by a dull, heavy ache in his muscles. His left arm, the one that took the brunt of the explosion, was stiff. Buzz. They're here, Izuku whispered. The loading bay doors rattled. Bang. 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 Come out, little hero. We know you're in there. They were trying to break the doors down. Izuku looked around. He needed an exit. There was a skylight, but it was 30 feet up. Can I make the jump without F.A. Jean? He asked himself. Don't risk it, Banjo said. Your legs are tired. Use the lift. Izuku looked at the forklift. It was electric. Dead battery. The doors buckled. Metal screeched. Through the gap, a stream of fire shot into the bay, igniting a stack of wooden pallets. Smoke began to fill the room. Burn him out. Izuku stood up. He felt the heat on his face. Okay, he said. New plan. He walked over to the forklift. He jammed his fingers into the battery casing, ripping the cover off. Kaminari taught me this, he muttered. He channeled one for all, not as a physical boost, but focusing the energy discharge into his fingers. It wasn't electricity exactly, but raw energy. He jammed his hand into the battery terminals. Zap! The forklift sputtered. The lights flickered on. Izuku jumped into the driver's seat. He slammed it into reverse. The doors burst open. A dozen villains poured in, led by a man with a flamethrower quirk. There he is! Toast him! Izuku slammed his foot on the accelerator. The forklift whined, its tires screeching on the concrete. But he didn't drive away. He drove toward them. What is he doing? At the last second, Izuku engaged the lift mechanism. The heavy steel fork shot upward. He hit a ramp made of fallen debris. The forklift launched into the air. It was a ridiculous, desperate maneuver. The forklift, weighing tons, sailed over the heads of the stunned villains. As it passed over them, Izuku leaped off the seat. He grabbed the overhead sprinkler pipes with Black Whip. The forklift crashed into the group of villains behind him, scattering them like bowling pins. Izuku swung from the pipes, kicking the flamethrower villain in the face as he passed. He landed near the rear exit and kicked the door open. Fresh, cold air hit his face. He stumbled out into the alleyway. He was safe. For a moment, he leaned against the brick wall, sliding down until he was sitting on his heels. He checked the time on the shattered screen of his gauntlet. 21 hours and 3 minutes remaining. 3 hours. Only 3 hours. It felt like it had been days. He looked up at the sky. The purple barrier was still there, humming, mocking him. It trapped the smoke, the noise, and the smell of blood inside with him. He was wet. He was cold. He was hungry, and the buzzing in his head, the danger sense, was getting louder. Why? Izuku whispered, closing his eyes for a second. Why is it getting louder? Because... The fourth user's voice was grim. They aren't just searching anymore. They're organizing. Izuku opened his eyes. In the distance, the chaotic shouting of the villains had changed. It wasn't random anymore. Squad A, North Sector. Squad B, sweep the sewers. Flush him to the plaza. Someone had taken command. Izuku forced himself to stand up. His knees popped. They have a leader, Izuku realized. That makes them more dangerous, the second user said. But it also gives you a target. Cut off the head, and the body dies. Right, Izuku said. He rolled his shoulder, wincing at the pop in his joint. He looked down at his reflection in a puddle. The dark Deku looked back. The eyes were wild. The suit was destroyed. He looked less like a hero and more like a survivor of a horror movie. I can do this, he told the reflection. I have to do this. He turned away from the wall and started to run again, disappearing into the shadows of the third hour. The warm-up was over. The hunt had begun. The rain had changed. In the first few hours, it had been a storm, violent, thrashing, a physical assault of water and wind. Now, as the fourth hour of the siege began, the rain settled into a relentless, suffocating drizzle. It was a fine mist that hung in the air, refracting the purple light of the barrier and the harsh white glare of the floodlights into a dizzying, kaleidoscopic haze. Midoriya Izuku crouched on the rusted I-beam of a half-constructed skyscraper skeleton. He was 4 stories up, exposed to the elements, but he couldn't go inside. Inside was where the shadows were. Inside was where the traps were. He was shivering. Not from the cold. One for All kept his core temperature dangerously high, a furnace burning through his caloric reserves, but from the noise. Not the noise of the city. The noise in his head. Bzzzzzzzzzt. It was a constant, low-frequency vibration at the base of his skull. It felt like a wasp had crawled into his ear canal, and was buzzing against his eardrum. I'm sorry, Ninth. The voice of Heike Shinomori, the fourth user, echoed in the headspace. The vestige sounded strained, his voice thrumming with the same tension that plagued Izuku's body. I'm trying to dampen it. But there is just so much. It's okay, Izuku whispered, his voice cracking. He pressed the palm of his hand against his temple, grinding the heel into the bone as if he could physically crush the sensation. It's just information. I need information. But it wasn't just information anymore. Danger sense was designed to warn of immediate threats. A punch. A falling rock. Malice directed specifically at the user. Here, in the kill zone, everything was malice. The very air felt hostile. The ground was littered with enemies who wanted him dead. The barrier itself was a construct of pure hatred. The quirk was overloaded, unable to distinguish between a sniper taking aim and a villain 3 blocks away simply thinking about killing him. It was a chorus of murder. Hour 4, the needle in the haystack. Izuku stood up, his knees creaking. The adrenaline crash was beginning to set in. The initial panic of the trap had faded, replaced by a grim, plodding reality. He had 20 hours left. He took a step forward along the beam. Spike. The buzz in his head escalated into a shriek. A hot, searing lance of pain shot through his left eye. Izuku didn't think, he reacted. He threw his body backward, twisting in the air. Zip. Something small and silver whistled past his face, missing the bridge of his nose by a millimeter. It struck the steel beam where he had been standing with a ping, embedding itself deep into the metal. Izuku landed in a crouch, black whip flaring out to stabilize him. He looked at the projectile. It wasn't a bullet. It was a 6-inch steel needle, thin as a wire, with no rifling. Sniper, Izuku breathed. Spike. Another stab of pain. This time, from the right. Izuku rolled. A second needle struck the concrete slab near his hand, sparking against the stone. Where? Izuku scanned the horizon. The mist made visibility terrible. The floodlights created deep, impenetrable shadows. High ground? The third user, Fa Jin's originator, suggested. Southeast quadrant. 700 meters. No. The fourth user corrected, his voice pained. The malice, it's bouncing. The danger isn't coming from a straight line. The intent is curved. Izuku kept moving. He couldn't stay still. He sprinted along the girder, leaping to the adjacent rooftop. Zip. 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 3 more needles struck the space behind his heels. They were silent. No gunshot. No muzzle flare. Just the deadly whistle of displaced air. He's leading me, Izuku realized. He's not shooting where I am. He's shooting where I'm going to be. He needed cover. He dove through an open skylight, crashing into the dark interior of an abandoned textile factory. He rolled to his feet, breathing hard. Inside, the buzzing in his head didn't stop. It shifted. It wasn't the sharp spike of the projectile anymore. It was the dull, throbbing pressure of proximity. They know I'm in here. Come out, hero! A voice echoed from the catwalks above. Needle says he tagged you. He says you're slowing down. Izuku looked up. He couldn't see them, but he could feel them. 4 signatures. No, 5. He was tired of running. I'm not slowing down, Izuku muttered. He activated One for All, full cowling 30%. The green lightning illuminated the dark factory floor, casting long, dancing shadows against the rusting looms. He jumped. He bypassed the stairs, vaulting straight up to the catwalk. He landed in front of a villain holding a crowbar. The villain blinked. He's he. Izuku didn't let him finish. He delivered a swift, open palm strike to the villain's solar plexus. It was a precise, controlled hit, designed to knock the wind out of him without breaking ribs. The villain folded like a lawn chair, but as the man fell, the buzzing in Izuku's head flared again. Behind, Izuku ducked. A chain whipped over his head. He spun, sweeping the legs of the second attacker. Right. He caught a knife blade between his gauntlet fingers. It was a dance of violence, dictated entirely by the migraine in his skull. Izuku wasn't fighting with his eyes. He was fighting with the pain. Every throb was a command. Duck. Weave. Punch. Kick. But it was exhausting. The constant overstimulation was frying his nerves. He felt nauseous. The world was tilting on its axis. He threw the last villain, a man with lizard scales, over the railing, catching him with black whip just before he hit the ground to ensure he wasn't killed. He lowered the unconscious lizard man gently to the floor. Safe, Izuku whispered. Spike. The window shattered. A needle struck Izuku in the shoulder. It didn't penetrate the bone, but it punched through the Kevlar and the muscle of his deltoid. Gah! Izuku stumbled back, clutching his arm. The pain was sharp, hot, and immediate. He can see through walls? Izuku gasped. Thermal. The second user analyzed instantly. Or an X-ray quirk. He's tracking your body heat. The walls mean nothing to him. Izuku ripped the needle out with a grunt of agony. Blood welled up, warm and sticky, soaking his already ruined suit. He couldn't stay here. If he stayed, he was a sitting duck. He had to move. He had to find the sniper. But how do you find a sniper when your danger sense is screaming about everything? Izuku leaped back out the window, back into the rain. Hour 5, the fog of war. The chase had been going on for 40 minutes. Izuku was panting heavily, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was running through the labyrinth of the container yard again, using the metal boxes as cover. The sniper, Needle, was relentless. Every time Izuku stopped for more than 3 seconds, a needle would embed itself in the metal next to his head. The villain was playing with him, hurting him, and the herd was waiting. As Izuku turned a corner, he ran straight into a wall of wind. It wasn't a natural wind. It was a compressed air cannon, generated by a villain standing atop a crane. Gotcha! The blast hit Izuku squarely in the chest. He was lifted off his feet and slammed backward into a shipping container. The metal dented under the impact. Izuku slid to the ground, coughing. His ribs felt like they were grating against each other. Buzz. 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 The danger sense was a cacophony now. It was warning him of the sniper. It was warning him of the wind user. It was warning him of the 6 villains closing in from the alleys. Too many, Izuku wheezed. Too loud. He needed silence. He needed just 1 minute of silence to think, to plan, to breathe. Smokescreen. And urged. Use it. Blind them. Overload their visuals. Right. Izuku forced himself to his feet. He channeled the 6th user's quirk. Purple haze. It poured from his body in thick, billowing waves. It wasn't just smoke. It was a dense, chemically inert cloud that blocked light and sound. Within seconds the alleyway was filled. The floodlights were blotted out. The world turned a murky, violet gray. Izuku leaned against the cold metal of the container, sliding down to a sitting position. The visual isolation helped. He closed his eyes. 1 minute. Just give me 1 minute. He reached into his utility belt and pulled out a small nutrient jelly pouch. He tore the top off with his teeth and downed it in one swallow. It tasted like chalk and artificial grapes, but the glucose hit his bloodstream almost instantly. Heart rate is 180. Nana Shimura whispered. You need to calm down, Izuku. You're hyperventilating. I can't, Izuku thought back. If I calm down, the pain stops. If the pain stops, I fall asleep. He checked the wound on his shoulder. It had stopped bleeding, cauterized by the friction of the suit and his own accelerated healing factor, a minor vestige of the stockpile quirk enhancing his natural biology. But it throbbed in time with the danger sense. Where is he? Izuku muttered. The sniper. If I can take him out, I can stop moving. Whoosh. The smoke vanished. It didn't dissipate naturally. It was ripped away. The wind villain on the crane had fired a cyclone blast directly into the alley. The purple fog was sucked upward into a vortex and dispersed into the night sky. Izuku sat there, exposed, the empty jelly pouch still in his hand. He looked up. The wind villain was grinning. Nice try, hero. But we know your tricks. AFO gave us the dossier. We know about the smoke. We know about the whip. They know everything. The realization hit Izuku harder than the wind blast. This wasn't a battle. It was a dissection. They knew his quirks. They knew his limits. They were countering him piece by piece. Spike. A needle took Izuku in the thigh. Arg. He fell to one knee. This one went deep. It pinned his muscle to the bone. Can't run now. The wind villain laughed. Finish him, boys. From the shadows of the containers, the squad emerged. Chains, bats, quirks glowing in the dark. Izuku looked at the needle in his leg. He gripped it. Do it! The second user commanded. Izuku screamed and ripped the needle out. A spray of blood hit the wet pavement. He stood up. The pain was blinding. His leg gave way for a second, then held. Black whip wrapped around his thigh, acting as a tourniquet and a brace. He looked at the villains approaching him. They were smiling. They thought they had won. They saw a broken boy bleeding, cornered, out of tricks. But they didn't see the eyes. The green glow in the cowl flared brighter. The pupils were gone. There was only raw power. Hour 6, the shift. The buzzing in his head finally snapped something. It wasn't a mental break in the sense of insanity. It was a shift in priority. It was the cold, hard realization that his current strategy, capture, contain, minimize harm, was incompatible with survival. He couldn't dodge the needles if he was worrying about concussing the guy with the baseball bat. He couldn't silence the danger sense if the threats kept getting back up. Stop trying to be All Might. The second user's voice was no longer a suggestion. It was an order. All Might was a pillar. You are a ghost. You don't stand there and take it. You strike, and you make sure they don't follow you. Izuku looked at the lead villain, a man with rock-hard skin charging at him. Please, Izuku whispered. Stay down. Die. The rock villain swung a fist. Izuku didn't dodge. He stepped inside the guard. He grabbed the villain's wrist with his left hand. One for all, 45%. He didn't throw him. He didn't trip him. Izuku drove his right elbow into the villain's extended elbow joint. Crack. The sound was louder than the rain. It was the sickening, wet pop of bone and cartilage failing under immense pressure. The rock villain didn't scream immediately. He stared at his arm, which was now bent at a horrific, unnatural angle. Then, the air filled with a high-pitched shriek of agony. "I told you," Izuku said. His voice was flat, devoid of the usual nervous stutter. "Stay down." The other villains froze. They had seen Izuku fight for 5 hours. They had seen him tie people up. They had seen him knock people out. They had never seen him maim. He broke it," one of them whispered. "He's crazy! Get him!" They rushed him, but the hesitation had cost them. Izuku moved. He was a blur of violence. He wasn't using the environment anymore. He was going through them. A villain with a blade quirk lunged. Izuku caught the blade with black whip, twisted it, and kicked the man's knee backward. Another snap. Another scream. A villain with a fire quirk tried to inhale. Izuku fired an air force blast directly into the man's open mouth. The villain choked, gagging, collapsing as the air pressure wrought havoc on his lungs. Izuku wasn't killing them. He knew exactly how much force to apply to break a bone without severing an artery. He knew exactly where to hit to cause unconsciousness without brain damage, but he was hurting them. Badly. The danger sense was still screaming, but the sources of the screams were being silenced one by one. 1 down. 2 down. 3 down. The alleyway became a scene of carnage. Bodies lay in the water, groaning, clutching broken limbs. Izuku stood in the center of it, the rain washing the blood from his gauntlets. He looked up at the crane. The wind villain was staring down, his face pale. "You!" the villain stammered. "You're supposed to be a hero." Izuku didn't answer. He just looked at the crane. Black whip. He fired a tendril. It didn't aim for the villain. It aimed for the hydraulic line of the crane's arm. He yanked. The line burst. The crane arm, lacking pressure, swung wildly, smashing into the control cab. The wind villain scrambled out, falling onto the shipping containers below with a heavy thud. He didn't get up. "That leaves one," Izuku said. "Spike. The needle. It came from the north. The top of the Fukui Heavy Industries smokestack." Izuku turned his head slowly. The pain in his skull was a roadmap now. He didn't need to see the sniper. He could feel the hate. "I see you," Izuku whispered. He crouched. Gene charge. He began to bob up and down, building the kinetic energy. The concrete beneath his feet began to crack. "Go," the third user said. Izuku launched. He didn't touch the ground. He kicked off the wall of a warehouse, then a lamppost, then the side of the water tower. He was a green lightning bolt ascending toward the highest point in the ward. At the top of the smokestack, the villain known as Needle lowered his rifle. He was a professional. He had killed politicians, heroes, CEOs. He had never missed this many times. He looked through his thermoscope. The heat signature was coming. Fast. Too fast. "Monster," Needle muttered, chambering another round. He aimed at the approaching green blur. "Just die," he fired. Izuku saw the needle coming. He felt it in his brain before it left the barrel. In the air, suspended by float, Izuku did something reckless. He reached out with his left hand, the injured one. He didn't catch the needle. He deflected it with a flick of his finger, using a micro-burst of air force. The needle spun harmlessly away into the night. Needle's eyes went wide behind his goggles. Impossible. Izuku landed on the rim of the smokestack. The wind was howling up here. The view was terrifying. The entire district was laid out below, a grid of lights and darkness enclosed in the purple dome. Izuku walked toward the sniper. Needle pulled a pistol. He fired 3 shots. Izuku didn't dodge. He tanked them. The bullets flattened against his armored chest plate, bruising his ribs but failing to penetrate. He reached out and grabbed the barrel of the pistol. He crushed it like aluminum foil. Needle trembled. Up close, the hero looked horrific. The mask was half torn. One eye was visible, bloodshot, wide, terrified, and terrifying. The suit was a rag. He smelled like ozone, blood, and burnt sugar. "Who are you?" Needle whispered. Izuku looked at him. The buzzing in his head finally, mercifully, quieted down to a dull hum. The immediate threat was neutralized. "I'm the decoy," Izuku rasped. He grabbed Needle by the collar of his tactical vest. Sleep, he headbutted the villain. It was a crude move. Ugly. But effective. Needle's eyes rolled back in his head, and he slumped forward. Izuku caught him before he could fall off the edge. He used Black Whip to bind the villain to the safety railing of the smokestack. He checked the bonds twice. Tight. Secure. Then, Izuku sat down on the metal grating. He was 200 meters in the air. The rain felt colder up here. He pressed his hands against his face. His head was still throbbing, a phantom echo of the overload. You did what you had to do, Nana said softly. I broke his arm, Izuku whispered into his hands. The guy in the alley? I felt it snap. He was going to stab you through the lung. The second user replied. You traded a broken bone for your life. That is the exchange rate of war. I'm not at war, Izuku said, looking at his shaking hands. I'm just. He couldn't finish the sentence. I'm just a high school student. That wasn't true anymore. He hadn't been a student since the war started. He looked at the digital clock on the tower below. 18 hours remaining. 6 hours down. 18 to go. He had survived the fodder. He had survived the sniper. But as he looked down at the city, he saw the movement again. The ants were regrouping. They were gathering in the center, and from the shadows of the southern sector, something massive was moving. Something that didn't show up on thermal scanners because it was cold. Something that didn't trigger danger sense because it had no mind to project malice. It was just hunger. Izuku stood up, wincing as his leg protested. The headache was gone, replaced by a deep, encroaching dread. Round 2, Izuku whispered. He stepped off the edge of the smokestack and plummeted back into the dark. The lights went out at the top of the 7th hour. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a tactical decision. Izuku, perched precariously on the support strut of a shattered billboard, had realized that the floodlights illuminating the ward were a double-edged sword. They blinded his enemies, yes, but they also turned the kill zone into a stage where he was the only performer. So, he had spent the last 20 minutes moving through the perimeter, using Air Force blasts to shatter the halogen bulbs one by one. Pup pup pup. With each burst of compressed air, a section of the district plunged into darkness. When the last light on the Fukui Heavy Industries tower shattered, the artificial day ended abruptly. The purple dome overhead provided no illumination. It only trapped the darkness inside, sealing it like ink in a bottle. Now, it was truly night. Hour 7, the weight of silence. Silence should have been a relief. After 6 hours of screaming, explosions, grinding metal, and the ceaseless, agonizing buzz of danger sense, the quiet should have been a balm to Izuku's frayed nerves. It wasn't. The silence was heavy. It had mass. It pressed against his eardrums, a physical weight that made him feel as though he were underwater. Izuku sat in the corner of an abandoned subway station entrance, just below street level. The concrete was cold and damp. The rain had slowed to erratic drip, the water tapping a rhythmic, maddening beat against a piece of loose sheet metal nearby. Plink. 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 He huddled into himself, pulling the tattered remains of his yellow cape tighter around his shoulders. It was soaked through, smelling of mildew and the copper tang of blood, some his, mostly theirs. He checked his gauntlet. The screen was cracked, spider-webbed fissures distorting the red digits. 17 hours 3 minutes and 12 seconds remaining. 17 hours, Izuku whispered. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, raspy, dry, and terrifyingly small. He coughed, and the sound echoed down the subway stairs, disappearing into the black void of the tunnels below. He flinched, instinctively reaching for the ground to steady himself, expecting an attack. Nothing came. That was the worst part. The attacks had stopped. For the first 6 hours, the assault had been relentless. Wave after wave of fodder, followed by the snipers, followed by the heavy hitters. But now, nothing. No shouting. No footsteps. No distant gunfire. The villains had retreated into the darkness. Why? Izuku murmured, his eyes darting around the shadows. His vision, enhanced slightly by One for All but lacking the true night vision gear he needed, struggled to parse shapes. Was that a pile of trash, or a person crouching? Was that a pipe, or a gun barrel? Buzz. A faint, ghostly hum from danger sense. It wasn't a direction. It wasn't an attack. It was just presence. They were out there. Watching. Waiting. Izuku pressed his hand against his left thigh. The needle wound from the sniper was throbbing with a dull, hot rhythm. He had bound it with black whip earlier, but the quirk required conscious effort to maintain. If he fell asleep, the binding would dissolve, and the bleeding would start again. He needed a real bandage. He fumbled with his utility belt. One pouch was empty energy jellies. One was crushed the bento. One contained a small first aid kit. He opened it with trembling fingers. Antiseptic spray. Gauze. Tape. He sprayed the wound. The sting was sharp and electric, shocking him fully awake. He bit down on his glove to stifle a groan. He wrapped the gauze tight, too tight, probably, but he needed the pressure. Okay, he breathed. Okay. I'm okay. He wasn't okay. He was exhausted. Not the tired after a long run exhausted. This was cellular exhaustion. His mitochondria felt like they were striking. Every movement required a deliberate command from his brain. Lift arm, turn head. Blink. He leaned his head back against the tiled wall. Just for a second. Just to rest his eyes. Don't close them, a voice said. It wasn't a sound. It was a thought that wasn't his own. Izuku snapped his eyes open. Hour 8. The Council of Ghosts. The landscape of his mind was usually a sanctuary. The vestige world, that swirling aurora of lights and shadows, was where he went to learn, to plan. But tonight, the sanctuary was a war room. Izuku slipped into a meditative trance, keeping one part of his consciousness anchored to the physical world, listening for footsteps while his mind drifted inward. He stood in the void. The vestiges were arranged in a semicircle. Nana Shimura looked heartbroken. Her spectral form flickered with agitation. She was pacing. His heart rate is dropping too low when he rests, Nana said, not to Izuku, but to the others. His cortisol levels are through the roof. If he keeps spiking adrenaline like this without caloric intake, he's going into hypoglycemic shock before sunrise. He can eat the moss on the walls for all I care, as long as he stays awake. The second user, the Scarface resistance leader, stood with his arms crossed. His presence was like a steel wall, cold, unyielding. You're pushing him too hard, Yoichi, the first user, said softly. He looked at Izuku's projection, which appeared in the vestige world as a ragged, flickering child. Look at him. He's terrified. He should be. The second shot back. Fear keeps you alive. Comfort kills you. If he relaxes, if he starts thinking about his warm bed or his friends, he dies. And if he dies, one for all dies with him. Is that what you want? Izuku watched them argue. He felt like a child listening to his parents fight in the next room. I can still fight, Izuku projected his thought. The vestiges turned to him. We know you can, kid, Banjo the fifth user said, stepping forward. He put a large hand on Izuku's shoulder. But you're running on empty. You need to conserve. Stop using full calling constantly. Use it only on impact. That's risky, the third user argued. Reaction time delay, better than burning out. Banjo grunted. The second user walked up to Izuku. He leaned down, his face inches from Izuku's. His eyes were hard, flinty. Tell me, ninth, the second said. In the alleyway. When you broke that man's arm. How did it feel? Izuku flinched. The memory of the sound, the wet snap, made his stomach turn. It felt awful. Did he get back up? No. Did he try to kill you again? No. Then it was the right thing to do. The second straightened up. You are holding on to a version of yourself that no longer exists. The boy who saves everyone with a smile? He's not in this cage. Only the survivor is here. The survivor breaks arms. The survivor cripples enemies to ensure they don't pursue. You need to make peace with that. Now, stop it! Nana shouted. You're turning him into a machine. He's a child. He is the vessel. The second roared back. And the vessel is cracking. I am trying to weld it shut. The argument exploded again. Izuku pulled back. He withdrew from the vestige world, the voices fading into a dull murmur in the back of his head. He opened his eyes in the subway station. He was alone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the bento box again. He shone a tiny green spark of one for all from his finger to see it. The plastic lid was shattered. The rice was mixed with dirt and pocket lint. The little sausages shaped like octopuses were squashed flat. All Might had made this. He had probably woken up early, his skeletal hands trembling as he cut the sausages, thinking about how to cheer Izuku up. A tear leaked out of Izuku's eye. It cut a clean track through the grime on his cheek. He couldn't eat it. Not because it was dirty, but because if he ate it, he was accepting that this was his last meal. He shoved the mess back into his pocket. Sniff. Izuku froze. He sniffed the air again. The subway station smelled of old urine and damp concrete. But underneath that, something else. Sweet. Sickly sweet. Like roasting almonds and cherry blossoms. Buzz. The danger sense didn't spike. It just rose. A slow, creeping tide of warning. Gas, Izuku whispered. Hour 9, the invisible ocean. He scrambled to his feet. The sweetness was getting stronger. It wasn't drifting in, it was settling. Heavier than air, Izuku analyzed instantly. It's filling the low ground. He was below street level. He was in the bowl. He turned to run up the stairs, but his legs felt heavy. Not tired, heavy. As if gravity had increased by 50%. Neurotoxin, he gasped. He took a step and stumbled. His coordination was off. The signal from his brain to his leg was lagging. Hold your breath. The third user screamed. Izuku clamped his mouth shut. He activated cowling, but the green lightning sputtered. His focus was slipping. He clawed his way up the stairs. The exit was only 20 feet away, but it looked like a mile. The darkness at the top of the stairs seemed to be swirling. He burst out onto the street level, collapsing onto the wet pavement. He rolled away from the subway entrance, gasping for air, fresh air. But the air on the street wasn't fresh. The street was filled with a low-hanging fog. It swirled around his ankles, white and dense, glowing faintly in the reflection of the purple barrier above. It's the whole block, Izuku wheezed. He tried to stand, but his equilibrium was shot. The world spun violently to the left. He fell, catching himself on his hands and knees. Clap. 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 Slow, mocking applause echoed from the darkness. Impressive, a voice said. It sounded muffled, as if coming through a filter. Most people pass out within 30 seconds of the almond scent. You lasted 45. Izuku lifted his head. His vision was swimming. Double vision. He saw 2 lampposts. 2 barriers. Who? Izuku tried to speak, but his tongue felt thick, numb. Names are for tombstones, the voice said. But you can call me the fumigator. I was in Tartarus, Block B, solitary. They didn't like my perfume. A figure stepped out of the fog about 10 meters away. He was wearing a heavy, industrial-grade hazmat suit, colored a dull, rusted orange. A gas mask with 3 canisters covered his face. On his back, massive tanks hissed. You're twitching, Fumigator noted, tilting his head. The toxin affects the synaptic gaps. It delays nerve transmission. In another 5 minutes your heart will forget to beat. Izuku tried to summon Blackwhip. The tendrils emerged, but they were thin, erratic. They lashed out wildly, missing the villain and striking a nearby car. Sloppy, fumigated Sked. He reached to his belt and pulled out a grenade launcher. Let's speed this up. Thump. A canister fired. It landed at Izuku's feet. Hiss. More gas. Thick, purple gas this time. Izuku held his breath again, rolling backward. But his body felt like it was moving through molasses. The gas washed over him. It burned. It wasn't just a neurotoxin, it was a vesicant. A blistering agent. His skin felt like it was being rubbed with sandpaper. His eyes watered so badly he was effectively blind. Move, ninth! Get high! The second user barked. The gas is heavy! Go up! Izuku gritted his teeth. He focused every ounce of willpower on his legs. One for all, 45%. He screamed, a soundless, strangled cry in his throat, and launched himself upward. He aimed for the second-story balcony of an apartment complex. He missed. His depth perception was gone. He undershot the jump, slamming his chest against the railing. He scrambled, his fingers clawing at the wet concrete, his boots slipping on the wall. Going somewhere? Thump. Thump. 2 more canisters hit the wall next to him. Izuku hauled himself over the railing just as the gas billowed up. He rolled onto the balcony, crashing into a sliding glass door. The glass shattered. He tumbled into someone's abandoned living room. He lay there, gasping. The air inside the apartment was cleaner, but the gas was creeping over the balcony lip like a living thing. He was trapped. Hour 10, the battle for breath. The apartment was dark. Izuku crawled toward the kitchen, dragging his numb legs. He needed water. He needed to wash his eyes. He pulled himself up to the sink and turned the tap. Nothing. The water had been cut along with the power. No, Izuku whimpered. He grabbed a dish towel hanging from the oven handle. It was dry. Useless for filtering. He looked around desperately. He saw a vase with dead flowers on the table. It had water in it. Stagnant, green, foul-smelling water. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the vase and dumped the water over his face. It smelled of rot, but it washed the chemical residue from his eyes. He soaked the dish towel in the remaining sludge and tied it tight around his face, over his damaged mask. It was a pathetic defense. But it was something. Creak. The floorboards in the hallway outside the apartment creaked. Danger sense was confused. The gas was everywhere, so the threat was everywhere. But the footstep, that was specific. Fumigator was coming for the kill. Izuku pressed himself against the kitchen island. His heart was hammering, an erratic, stumbling rhythm. Thump thump, pause thump. The toxin was working. I know you're in here, little hero. Fumigator's voice came from the front door. I can hear you wheezing. Izuku looked at his hands. They were trembling uncontrollably. He couldn't punch. If he tried to throw a smash, he'd miss, or worse, the feedback would shatter his arm because he couldn't brace his muscles correctly. He had to be smart. He had to be tactical. Think, the first user whispered. You can't outfight him physically right now. Use his quirk against him. Izuku looked at the gas creeping along the floor. It was flammable? No, Fumigator wouldn't risk it in an enclosed space. But it was dense. It displaced oxygen. Izuku looked at the ceiling. A fire sprinkler system. But the water was cut. Wait. Fire sprinkler systems in old buildings often had a gravity tank on the roof. A reserve. Even if the city water was cut, the tank might still have pressure. He needed heat to trigger it. He didn't have a fire quirk, but he had one for all. Friction. Fumigator stepped into the living room. His silhouette was bulky, monstrous in the gloom. There you are, he raised the grenade launcher. Izuku didn't run at him. He ran at the wall. He moved with a drunken stagger, bouncing off the sofa. Desperate? Fumigator laughed. He fired a canister. It hit the couch, exploding into a cloud of purple death. Izuku leaped. He grabbed the chandelier, a gaudy, brass fixture, and swung. Not at the villain, but toward the corner of the room where the sprinkler head sat on the ceiling. He reached out with his hand. Delaware smash. He didn't fire the air pressure. He snapped his fingers against the sprinkler head mechanism. The sheer friction and force of the 100% snap generated a spark of intense heat and kinetic force. The glass bulb in the sprinkler shattered. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of pipes, the water came. It wasn't a spray. It was a deluge of black, rusty sludge from the roof tank, pressurized by gravity. It sprayed outward in a massive cone. What? Fumigator looked up. The water hit the gas. The gas was heavy, particulate-based. The water droplets bound to the particles, dragging them out of the air and slamming them to the floor in a muddy sludge. The fog in the room cleared instantly. Fumigator was drenched. His hazmat suit was slick with black water. You little brat. He raised the launcher again. But Izuku was already moving. The water didn't cure the poison in his blood, but it cleared his vision. And it distracted the enemy. Izuku didn't punch. He used Black Whip. He fired 2 tendrils. Not at Fumigator. At the floor. He pulled himself down, sliding across the wet laminate like a hockey puck. He went under Fumigator's aim. The grenade launcher fired over his head, blowing a hole in the kitchen cabinets. Izuku slid between Fumigator's legs. As he passed, he reached up. He didn't strike the villain. He grabbed the hose connecting the tanks to the mask. Rip! Izuku used the momentum of his slide to tear the hose free. There was a hiss of escaping gas. Fumigator panicked. No! My mix! He dropped the launcher and clawed at his mask. The air in the room was now breathable mostly, but the villain was used to his own filtered supply. He gasped, choking on the sudden intake of oxygen and the residual fumes. Izuku kicked off the wall behind the villain. He was weak. He was dizzy. But he had one good hit left in him. He landed on Fumigator's back. Sleep, Izuku wheezed. He wrapped Black Whip around the villain's neck. A sleeper hold. Fumigator thrashed. He slammed backward into the wall, crushing Izuku between his tanks and the plaster. Izuku cried out. His ribs screamed. The darkness encroached on his vision. Hold on! Banjo roared. Izuku squeezed. He channeled 15% into his arms. The villain struggled, and then went limp. They both slid down the wall to the floor. Izuku disentangled himself, crawling away from the unconscious villain. He collapsed on the wet rug. He coughed, and this time, he hacked up a glob of dark mucus. You need to leave, Nana said urgently. The gas outside is still there. This room is compromised. I can't. Izuku whispered. He tried to stand, but his legs refused. The neurotoxin was peaking. He was paralyzed from the waist down. He dragged himself, hand over hand. Crawling like a wounded soldier, he made it to the hallway. Then to the stairwell. He pulled himself up one step. Then another. He had to get to the roof. Above the fog. It took him 20 minutes to climb 3 flights of stairs. When he finally burst out onto the roof of the apartment complex, the rain had started again. A gentle, cleaning rain. Izuku rolled onto his back, letting the water hit his face. He breathed in. The air was thin, but clean. He lay there, staring up at the purple dome. 14 hours remaining. 10 hours gone. 14 left. He checked his body. His legs were numbwood. His left arm was useless. His breath rattled in his chest like loose change. He was alive. But he was diminished. The poison was in his system now. It would make him slower, weaker, and the silence returned. But this time, it was different. From the darkness of the rooftop access door, a shadow emerged. Not a villain. A hallucination. It was Bakugo. He was wearing his UA uniform, pristine and clean. He looked down at Izuku with a sneer. Look at you, the hallucination said. Lying in the mud. You think you're a hero? You're just a roadkill. Izuku blinked. Kaken? You can't save anyone, the phantom Bakugo said. You couldn't even save yourself from a little gas. Just give up, Deku. Die here. It's easier. Izuku closed his eyes and shook his head. When he opened them, the phantom was gone. It's the toxin, Izuku muttered. Just the toxin. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just the toxin. His mind was starting to crack. The isolation, the darkness, the constant fear. It was eating him alive. He dragged himself to the center of the roof, away from the edges. He curled into a ball, trying to preserve body heat. He needed 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes for his liver to process the toxin. He closed his eyes. Buzz. Danger sense hummed. Not an attack. Just a reminder. We are still here. Izuku drifted into a feverish half-sleep, his hand clutching the pocket where the crushed bento box lay. The night was not even halfway over.